Okay, welcome everybody. It's been 2 weeks. Seems like such a long time without doing this, but we think we remember how things go, and we're glad you're all here, new people and returning people. Today we have Stan Carey and James Harbeck, the founders of the blog Strong Language. Stan Carey, I've never met in person, so I'm happy to actually see him and talk to him. He's always had this sort of vague Twitter icon where you don't quite see his face. He's partly in shadow, so it's nice to actually see and talk to him after talking to him for many times over many years on Twitter. Stan's a freelance copy editor and writer. He's trained as a scientist, biologist, which I think was true of our guest Mignon Fogarty also. I think it was biology. He writes for his own blog and as well as regularly for Macmillan Dictionary. And Stan, you're in Western Ireland near Galway. Are you in Galway proper or around?
I'm in the outskirts of Galway, Mark, in a village called Saltchill. It's about Saltchill, about 5 minutes from the shore, and maybe half an hour's walk from the city centre.
Oh, nice. Very nice. All right. And James Harbeck, also a freelance editor and writer, prolific blogger, really prolific blogger. And he's published 5 books.
Yeah, but they don't count.
We'll talk about all of them. And he has a master's in linguistics. He has a PhD in drama, which I haven't really talked to you too much about, so I'm curious about that. He writes, he sings, he's good in the kitchen. So it seems, and you're in Toronto, right? Are you in the city? What neighborhood?
If I look right out my window, I can see, as I'm looking right now, I can see the financial district. I am a block diagonally from Yonge and Front. I normally say I live so far downtown that downtown is up.
Okay. Well, welcome both of you. Let's start with, we usually start with the pandemic and how people are doing, but that gets tiring as the first question. So we can assume you're all huddled and miserable. Let's start with the origin story. Strong Language, we were just talking about this a little bit. I remember I was there on Twitter watching this thing. You know, it was a sudden idea and then it just appeared. So what's the story behind it?
Well, the year was 2014. No, December 11th, 2014. I've got it up on Twitter right here. I was talking about, I said, I'm grateful that a commenter on my Abso-fucking-lutely story linked to the XKCD Classic because I couldn't. And Stan says, you can't even link to sweary stuff. And about 5 tweets, we decided that we would create a group blog called Strong Language, and 3 days later it was up.
Excellent.
It happened very quickly.
The whole team. Yeah, we got our whole team involved very quickly. People were enthusiastic about it.
Yeah, you've got, I mean, I'm just looking through the contributor list and some of the recent people. You've got Ben Yagoda, Nancy Friedman, she's there quite regularly, Ben Zimmer, Iva Chung, Gretchen McCulloch, Lauren Gahn, Jonathan Green, Jesse Scheidlauer, Karen Conlin, Colleen Berry, who is a genius when it comes to swearing, and Corey Stamper, who's also an excellent with the mouth. So yeah, so how did you, was it just, you said, hey, who wants to write about swearing? And everybody had this pent up need to say something?
Basically, yeah, when James proposed the idea, we were having the conversation in public, obviously, because it was on Twitter. So people were listening, and as soon as we suggested, let's make a blog, let's ask other people, and there were people ready and waiting to go. And we had
literally, you asked Jesse and Kate Wiles right away, and they were in like Flynn before we'd even put up the blog.
Yeah, excellent. So let's talk about, you've been doing this since, I'm sorry, 2015?
It went up December 14th, 2014.
Okay. Yeah.
So
So yeah.
5 years.
So nearly 5 years. What have you learned? What is your perception? How has your perception of the art of swearing changed in that time?
Well, I've learned a fucking shitload. I'll let Stan go first.
I'll just pick up on that word shitload because that was one of the posts I found very informative early on. That was from Stephen Chrysomalis, and he wrote about shit ton and fuck ton and, or hang on, maybe I'm confusing that with another post. I'm reading stuff by proper linguists and lexicographers. I'm not trained in that area, so I've learned a lot from James's posts and Gretchen's posts and Iva's posts and a load of people.
Yeah.
James has specialized in syntax and pragmatics, which is extremely interesting to me and something I'm always trying to get a handle on, especially when it gets into the really nitty-gritty stuff, and swearing is kind of anomalous anyway.
My favorite things.
Swearing is kind of what?
My favorite things have actually... Oh, I can't hear. Everybody's talking.
Sorry. Go on. James, what are some of your favorite things?
Oh, I was just going to say, looking up in other languages, such as when, what was it, Scaramucci was in Global Autofellation with the Mooch, and I got to look at all these different translations, and also the shitholes comment that Trump gave us. Looking at the translations of these vulgarities in newspapers and news sources around the world was most singularly enlightening, and it's kind of inspired me. I think I want to go back and look at a little bit more of how certain swear words are realized in different languages. I've got a note to myself to get to that.
Oh yeah, that's interesting. So what do you recall? Shithole? What was how was that translated literally, or?
Well, it really depended. My favorite one was actually, I think it's Serbian, and they called it Vukojevic, which means Wolfville.
Outstanding.
It's apparently, we say bumfuck nowhere, and at least in somewhere parts of Canada, and also in Polish zadupie, which means up the ass. So yeah, a lot of. Meanwhile, in Chinese, it translated to countries where birds don't lay eggs. And the longer phrase is birds don't lay eggs and dogs don't shit. And they just left off the dogs don't shit and expected everybody would know it. It's very interesting to see some countries feel quite free to use the vulgarities in their news sources, and other ones are a little more restrained about it.
And interesting.
It's also very idiomatic.
Mm-hmm. From a translation standpoint, from a translation standpoint, a lot of those don't quite do the same thing, right? I mean, shithole is literally a place where one goes to drop, to defecate. How's that?
Yeah, the implication being that there are no public facilities there, but it's so idiomatic that we were so used to swearing in our own languages that we forget how weird they are when you look at them lexically. So it's usually it's a common problem in translation that you can't really translate swears directly. It just becomes they're so loaded with connotation rather than literal meaning that there's this huge variation in other languages, and it can be really strange when you translate them into your own.
Right, I'm sure. So my question about was you both sort of talked about what you learned, but I'm wondering is now I've met James, and James swears freely. He's very good at it, and he does it in the right time. And Stan, and I culturally you're in a part of the world that I'm not as familiar with. Does it come naturally to you? Are you a swearer by trade?
I am, but it really depends strongly on the context. Ireland has its own particular styles of swearing, of course, and we have a strong Catholic history, which usually is involved somewhere along the line. When we combine those with the sexual swears and the excretory-based swears, we get some excellent combinations. But I swear, I tend to be fairly reserved about swearing unless I'm comfortable around people. I would swear a lot in my own company or with family or friends, but I would tend to, I suppose, like anybody, just push the boat out more gradually when I'm in uncertain company.
I guess the most famous Irish language swear would probably be Pog Mahone, wouldn't it? Kiss my ass?
Irish language, probably. It's a bit of a t-shirt swear.
It is, isn't it?
I don't think I've ever heard it from an Irish person.
No, apparently I had an acting teacher who was from the Dublin area, and apparently her sister had an American husband, at least one, and she took him around and told him that if somebody said "Jes Maragut," which is "God I'm married to you," it's kind of, for those who aren't Stan, it's kind of a formal greeting. He should say, you're supposed to actually say "Jes Maragut Jes Patrick," and I'm sure my pronunciation is terrible, but "God married to you, I'm Patrick." But she told him to say "Jes Maragut Jes Pog Mahone," which means "God married to you and kiss my ass." So of course they all found this incredibly hilarious because they knew that he was being put on.
There are also some excellent traditional Irish curses. And again, you don't hear them very often, but I do try to sneak them in every so often. One that I'm particularly fond of is Gunnihe an Cath, who is Gunnihe an Jowl an Cath, which means may the cat eat you and may the devil eat the cat. And the devil does crop up in a lot of Irish swears and expletives, often pronounced divil in the vernacular way.
So there, I mean,
we do have a question that we had come in. It was from Susan Cart. Susan, if you want to unmute and ask, this is a good one.
Sure. Hi. So I was thinking about, like, swearing, you know, always has a shock or a disarming quality to it. Like, I'm going to say this and shock you. But sometimes it also has an endearing quality. And the example that I immediately thought of was, I live in Boston, big Red Sox fan. And after the Marathon bombing a number of years ago, the first Red Sox game after the bombing, Big Poppy gets on the field and starts addressing the crowd. And one of his quotes was, "This is our fucking city." And it was, of course, on live broadcast, and everybody went nuts and made it love him even more. So can you talk about that endearing quality and, you know, that piece of it?
Oh, the well-placed vulgarity is one of my favorite memories of, when I was in high school, my parents lived well out of town. And so for 2 of the 3 years, I stayed with people in town. This was Banff, Alberta, Canada. And first year of that, I stayed with a woman who was a nurse and was quite proper. Everything was very, very tidy, and she was well-spoken, the sort of person who had an immaculate living room and served tea and everything. And one time when I bought a new backpack, I said, "Well, it's quite good." She says, "Yes, damn good." And I just about had to step outside and laugh because it's the only time I'd heard her swear, and it's such a mild swear, but it was exactly the thing that just made the point so beautifully.
And in that moment, that scene, the David Ortiz from the Red Sox, it just seemed like that's what everybody's thinking at the time. I mean, you can't have that moment without having that word, right, as a reaction.
Yeah, it's a way of establishing rapport. Mm-hmm. It's an egalitarian use of the swear. It's for solidarity rather than aggression or abuse or catharsis. It's a kind of "we're all in this together" expletive.
It implies closeness. It's like coming out there in wearing something that you wouldn't normally wear, or not wearing something you would normally wear. I mean, with limits.
Your example, James, with the woman's use of "damn," it reminded me very much of Agent Cooper's in Twin Peaks when he was having his cup of coffee in the cafe, and he turns to the waitress and says, "This is, excuse me, a damn fine cup of coffee. And he does proceed to swear with an excuse me because he acknowledges that it's a breach of manners, but at the same time, by going ahead with the mild swear, he's establishing solidarity with the waitress. It worked really well.
You really have to know
Reverse
your audience.
prestige.
So, yeah, you really have to know your
Absolutely.
audience, though.
Oh, very much.
Yeah. And let's talk. Fuck is a word that can be so positive and endearing, more so than a lot of other swear words, I think, that are more, because I think maybe it's, this is just me, spitballing, but it seems to have lost its sexual meaning in so many uses, and even its aggressive meaning, whereas other words are still deal with bodily functions or bodily parts, and I don't know, they don't seem quite as versatile.
But shit's very versatile. I think
Okay.
it definitely can be used as a very endearing, well-placed swear in the right circumstance. If your well-behaved grandmother broke her favorite bowl, looked down on the floor and said, "Shit," you would probably remember it.
Well, yeah, okay. But it's not necessarily a positive use, but yeah, no.
Well, no, but
it's good. Yeah.
Well, or yes,
It's useful.
or another case, well, what shall we do with all this shit?
Yeah.
I think, yeah. Whereas, I mean, nobody's going to be using the number of words that you just don't use in any sort of friendly, positive way because their connotations, their usage still has too much literal effect. Nobody's going to use a word like whore, for instance, just casually without thinking of its literal connotation. And in fact, I don't use it
Except
as
in
vulgarity
French.
either.
Except in French, where it's being bleached a lot more.
Oh, well, yes. Fils de pute, putain, etc. Yeah. Although in Quebec, of course, they're famous for swearing liturgically instead, to the point where young children in catechism class break out into titters every time the teacher introduces them to the hostie, the ciboire, the calice, because these are the words that they swear with. So it just sounds wrong.
And what do these words translate for?
Oh, the host, the ciborium, the chalice. The ciborium holds the host. And the tabernacle, which also holds the chalice and the ciborium and the host. So tabernacle. These are all words of the furnishings of the Catholic liturgy, and most people never use them in regular conversation. But in Quebec, they're what you say if you're really irritated or you just want to swear. Goddess.
Interesting.
And they've retained that power even as the society there has become a lot more secular, haven't they? It's strange that taboo has survived.
Yeah, it's just sort of, just as we can talk quite freely about sex, but you're still not supposed to say fuck in a variety of places.
Well, in England, I don't know if it's true in Ireland, but bloody, which, the origin isn't really swearing, we don't think, but people
There's a lot of
associate
theories.
Christ's blood, and therefore this is, terrible thing to say. And of course, here's a little story. I was in England at my an aunt and uncle at their at a club they went to, with people they knew, and the word, we started talking about language, and to me, in America you hear it all the time, and I said, I don't remember what I said, but I made a comment on the word bloody, and my aunt simply, looked at me and said, "Well, this is not a word we use in company," or something like that. So
It reminds me of my first visit to England. I was staying in the house of a middle-class couple, and in Tooting or Wandsworth or somewhere around there, southwest London, and as they were particular about grammar, among other things, but I was referring for some reason to some crime committed with a sawed-off shotgun. Now, I'd made a double error, as she the lady of the house immediately said, sawn off. So first of all, it's a sawn off shotgun. And second, if you're going to say sawed, at least you can say sawed off, which would also be wrong, but sawed off is a rude thing to say in England, and it's nothing in Canada, but in England, it's like saying bugger off.
Mm-hmm.
So,
right.
yes, I said, oh, that's right. You don't like people saying sawed off, do you? And she didn't say another word.
Yeah.
Look, I was
And
16 or something, 18.
Sure.
She didn't
Yeah,
know who she was messing with.
Yeah. I never thought of that combination, that, that the accent would cause consternation there, but those two are very close, of course.
Quite.
Yeah.
The same for Canadians. We have the merger.
Yeah, right. And so you have the merger in Ireland. Do you have is it a lot of English, not necessarily in Irish, but in English speaking Ireland, are a lot of the swears universal to the British Isles, or are there some particular things? You mentioned the Catholic tradition.
There would be a lot of overlap, but words like shite would not really be used a lot in England, although they would be very common in Scotland. There would be more crossover between Ireland and Scotland, or particular Irish versions like gobshite and gobdaw, and a lot of our insults for, say, if you just want to insult somebody and call them a stupid person or an arsehole, there are a lot of Irish words like Amadan or Lutherman, which have crossed over into Brno English.
And Amadan was even used by Mike Oldfield.
I've always been curious about what he meant by that.
Somebody figured it out. She's singing, Ta me an Amadan Kjol. I'm the fool singing.
Okay. So
it sounds like it to me too.
Well, and on that actual note, we do have another question. This one's from Deanna. Deanna, if you want to unmute and ask.
I'm unmuting. Well, hang on. I'll start video real quick just so you have, person.
Yeah,
Sorry, I'm kind of like, I'm in a weird space at the moment.
Me too.
I'm going to out myself here. This will amuse you, and then I'm going to ask my actual question. My husband's half German, so we've picked up a few of those swear words around the house. So, and you cloak it in, like, pardon my French. So I had the funny experience one day of stubbing my toe or dropping something, and I yelled, "Scheiß!" And my Czech housekeeper poked her head in the room and said, "Are you okay?" Because of course she speaks German. Anyway, my question is this. I had this conversation with my mom this weekend. I was agitated about something and I dropped a damn or a shit or something like that. And she kind of winced and, I'm like, Mom, whatever. She says, I have tender ears, dear. Remember, great-grandmother always used to say that anybody who swears only does it because they're not intelligent enough to come up with something more creative to say. To which I always, in my head, I would never say this to great-grandma. I loved her dearly, but, great-grandma, that's just because you haven't heard me swear. I could be really creative. But it's like there's this sort of, in my family at least, the sort of declination of like, great-grandma wouldn't tolerate anything like that. Grandma is kind of like, yeah, but I've heard her drop a damn once in a while. My mom has what she calls tender ears, but I honestly learned to swear from her. She doesn't realize it. And I'm contextual that way. My Gen Zer is contextual, but there's F-bombs all over the place. My millennial is like, I can't stand to hear her talk about sex because it's just like, it's too much. And yeah, I mean, it's, the word just has no import for her. That's what it is. And so I'm kind of, it's easy to think that that's like it's just a declining trend. It's a generational shift. But when you look at the history of swearing and profanity, that doesn't really bear out because these words trend in and out of vulgarity and obscenity. And there's plenty of examples of obsequious, purity, but also outrageous profanity going back for millennia. So is it, if we were to look at this, is it like a declining, is it like a waveform? Does it come in and out? Is there any pattern at all?
It's a strongly aspiring middle class thing is what it is. The upper classes, especially the upper class men, have never been afraid to speak coarsely as the occasion demanded it. The prudishness that we associate with the Victorian era had to do with the rise of the middle class, who were always trying to move on up and therefore head towards prestige forms and away from anything that they associated with the lower classes. Remember, we think of this language as vulgar and the lower classes as vulgar. So I'm sure everybody can see that it's strongly classist, but the most classism has always come from those who want to be upwardly mobile. If you look at the language that's used by the rich upper classes, they're always a lot less concerned about how they look. And yes, it does come and go. In my thesis, looking at not vulgar words, I also found that the usage of certain words that are considered less dignified was comparatively common in, say, the fiction of Jane Austen, while being quite uncommon in American fiction of the time. Then they sort of merged the next century and down, and now moving back up. As people are just a lot, there's less sort of class stratification and upward striving, and that might change again with a lot of the cultural shifts.
Thank you.
Well, what about the longer term? I mean, I think there's always been a sense of there are words you don't use in polite company and those that you do, and that depending on where you are on that strata of how you define polite company. But what about, let's go to Deanna's grandmother. Do you think she swore like a racehorse when she was, what the term, swore like a racehorse?
Some people don't swear. And swearing is universal, but that doesn't extend to everybody. I think Timothy J. did some research on this and tried to find what percentage of words spoken were swear words. And he found that it came to about 0.7%, but that varied from 0 to 3. So there are people who don't swear and there are people who swear a great deal. I'm guessing James is a bit higher than the 0.7, probably around the average.
Well, James probably, skews the percentage by himself.
Well, I don't swear like the guys in the army, though. There's a joke about the Canadian Army that if you took away peanut butter and the word fuck, they'd starve to death and not be able to tell you.
What about in the last, let's bring it down. What about in the last, say, 20 years, the rise of the internet? We're forced on Twitter to listen to all the kids these days. Same thing on Facebook. Are we seeing any trends in terms of swearing because it's more accessible in social media?
I think it's too soon to say whether there are any new trends, but broad trends. Certainly there are new forms. I don't think that the abbreviation AF was around before the internet.
Not for that anyway. There are all these cameras that have such and such AF, and it used to mean autofocus, but that's not how I read it now.
Too late for that. It's been corrupted.
Yeah. I think we have a couple more questions on it. We want to make sure we get to all of them, if possible.
We do. Yes. I'm excited to hear the answer to this one. Mary, if you want to unmute and ask your question.
Yeah, I have seen in books and stuff, shite instead of shit. Why is it okay to frick shite? And do people actually say shite instead of shit? That's the question.
Shite is very much in my idiolect. It's an Irish and also Scottish variant of shit, and it goes back centuries. And when I was a young boy, I thought it was spelled S-H-I-G-H-T because I heard it before I saw it written down. what I soon learned.
It's just like
And there
art.
are also extended forms like gobshite and shitehawk, which I'm also very fond of. It has a good sound to it. You can extend the vowel more than you can with shit, so it has a slightly different effect and a different performative element.
Indeed, I think there's, you can go shit, but it's not the same as shite. It doesn't have the same arc. It's just like jamming on the brakes, isn't it?
Yeah, you need that diphthong.
Yeah,
You
whichever
mentioned
diphthong you prefer. Or it's like arse, which a lot of people in North America seem to think is a minced version of ass, whereas of course it's in North America, os and ass merged, and they never did, but people don't know that over here because we don't know shit.
Oh, okay.
Or
So
shite.
arse is another one that I wondered about. Thank you. So arse and shite are just variants with more like energy behind them.
Well, arse is the original.
It is?
Yeah,
So
ass,
is it-
ass just meant a donkey. That's why Jesus rode into Jerusalem on an ass. You know, he wasn't as arse, but he was on an ass, and you can put that in the Bible, and all the kids giggle and their mothers frown at them. But ass is a donkey, and os is your posterity.
is it a
That's why the word donkey
pronunciation?
is,
Is it a pronunciation difference in the beginning? Is it simply the different ways of pronouncing it than the spelling shifted?
Well, if you want to get into the rhotic versus non-rhotic, but I think Stan knows more about the history of shite. Yes.
Ours.
I did write about the history of shite, but it's basically just, it's been around centuries. It's a variant of shit. That's the short version.
Mhm. And in England, if I say ass, am I swearing?
Yes. It seems to be getting over. Do you think?
Stan, I think that's to you.
Do you think it's
Sorry,
getting
Mark, you're
across the
asking
pond?
if you're swearing if you say ass in England.
Yeah.
You are, but mildly, and you're an Americanly. You'll be immediately
Americanly.
identified as a non-English
Okay.
person because
Of course.
Asshole.
But there are
Yeah,
interesting
very American.
differences between the words considered taboo in UK and US.
Oh, as Americans are very, very shocked by one particular word that's quite common and unremarkable in England and especially Scotland.
Indeed.
Should we talk about the C word, which I always wonder. I never like the C word because I always confuse as to what word we're looking for.
Yeah, it's even becoming a pronoun in Scottish English.
Oh, what?
We had a very interesting
Really?
post on Strong Language about that last year, I think, or 2 years
Oh,
ago.
yes, I've got it right here. It was a guest post by Gary Toms and E. Jameson. And the title was, If Any Cunt Says It, Will Every Cunt Accept It? Because that's literally in Glasgow and thereabouts. It's become a pronoun. Any cunt, every cunt, etc.
So it's entirely unremarkable? Is it considered at all swearing?
Largely unremarkable. I don't think one would consider it formal, yeah?
It's unremarkable to people who have it in their dialect, but yeah.
It's sort of
local.
Begbie English, if you've watched Train Spotting. As it was his usual third-person pronoun, I think.
Let's take another question, and we'll hopefully get through all the swear words in this.
Perfect. Well, we can start with a couple of good ones from Christian's question. Christian, do you want to unmute and ask?
Okay. Thank you very much.
Nice beard.
Briefly, I did want to note on the previous topic, I saw Angel Heart in German. There's a scene in the end of the movie where the hero, frustrated, yells, shit! But in German, it's Scheiße! And it loses something, I feel. Maybe because of the long E at the end of it, but even if it would have sounded better as shite, I don't know if the Germans would have picked up on that, but it was just a weird thing I saw swear in another language. Anyway, my question is I would like the speakers to please reflect upon the diversity of the usage of the ass or ast suffix as an emphatic, such as dumbass or goat smelling ass. Ben Zimmer and I had a brief back and forth as to whether or not that was actually ASSED. He held it was just ASS. And no matter how I brainstormed a possible exception, he seemed to be pretty sound. I wondered if there was like some observation on like the nearly non-sequitorial. I mean, it can be used entirely outside of anatomical or scatological reference. And I'm also wondering whether it's heavier in American usage or if it has some coinage in Ireland. Thank you.
Do we have a post by someone on it, Stan?
I think you did
Maybe
recently,
you.
very recently.
Corey Stamper wrote a post on as as an intensifying suffix, I think.
Well, there's,
But I don't.
yeah. Because you have a couple of others on as, but maybe not that as the, I'm scrolling to try and,
While you're
because
scrolling, I
there's-
could
there's
briefly
half-assed, but
mention
the only past tense one really I think of as half-assed, and everything else is lame ass, dumb ass, silly ass, and so forth. But let me see if I can find it.
on scheisse versus shit, the big difference, as you noted, Christian, is that scheisse ends in a vowel. So for English-speaking swearers, that's probably not as satisfying because most of our swear words are monosyllabic and end in a consonant. But
And
I do
even-
remember picking up scheisse when I was learning German and trying to adopt it, but it didn't take.
I mean, even one that does end in a vowel like bugger, we don't usually hold a vowel very long.
That
Nobody
doesn't
says
end in a vowel for me.
bugger, do they? Maybe.
Or else
You
there are
could.
three words like poo and wee.
Mm-hmm. Yes, if you're going to learn it young, then obviously you're not going to be learning multi-syllable words right away. No, I can't find it. I'm sure there's something somewhere. It's strongly associated with African American English, especially many particular uses, and it's become very popular on Twitter. In my completely unscientific, impressionistic impression.
And it seems like you could, if you wanted to pronounce it asked, I don't think stupid asked, dumb asked. It maybe has a slightly different meaning that way.
Well, and while you're looking at the blog, we have a question about the blog, so that's pretty timely. Kristen, would you want to unmute and ask your question?
Yes, thank you. Stan and James, I just wanted to hear a bit more about your blog and what kind of subjects do you look for to talk about?
Pretty much anything to do with swearing is fair game. And
That's,
we quite regularly get guest posts as well, so they can be on pretty much any topic to do with swearing as well.
any topic. It gets quite broad. We've even dealt with words that are not so much swear words, but are taboo words. You know, words that I don't know. Have we done anything on racial epithets at all yet? They're on topic, but nobody really wants to touch them because they make us all kind of uncomfortable.
We haven't done much on them, and they're certainly strong language, but they're their own thing at the same time. They behave differently and they have different kinds of effects to swear words. But the subtitle of the blog is a sweary blog about swearing, but it's always been about, taboo vocabulary, as you say, James. So it covers
most of these words can be used in, as we talked about, mild ways. They can show anger. They can, you can call somebody a dumbass. But when you get into the racial epithets, I think the obvious one is the N word, which is very, very interesting in that it is something that is a huge cultural difference. So a white person saying it brings up the history of abuse of an entire people, whereas black people saying it, I hear it. When I did ride the bus, I heard it on the bus all the time. You hear it in rap music, of course. August Wilson plays, but it's a whole different word said by black people, and it's still offensive usually, but some people use it just very casually in a friendly manner.
In-group solidarity. You're marking that you're the target of the word and you're claiming it and you're using it in that way. Sort of like how Americans claimed Yankee for themselves, but in a much more marked way, because let's be honest, Yankee was never a term of abuse in the same way.
Right. Yeah. Is it,
I think when there's a white person using the word, if they're using it towards another white person, there's an element of complicity there. If they're using it towards a black person, there's the power imbalance of the history of the word is immediately apparent and awkward unless there's an established rapport between them that has made it okay for him to use that word.
Mhm.
But it has been reclaimed in black communities, but it's not one I'm comfortable saying and hearing either. It's not, at least from a white person.
Right. Is there any other word that approaches that?
There are a few they're all the slur words that are particularly that are based on race or ability, intellectual ability. For example, there's the British one, hacky, which I don't think is very extant in America. It's a racial epithet directed towards people of South Asian descent, and it's considered extremely abusive. But you don't hear it much in Ireland.
No, I have heard it on television, so it's, you know.
Yeah, that was used in Canada too. I'm not aware of it being used by the in-group in the same way.
Nor am I, but I'm not. I wouldn't know if it was.
Right. Is the N-word in Ireland? Does that have a different meaning? Is it used?
No, it's pretty much the same as I imagine it is in America. There was a controversial incident about 6 weeks ago when an Irish politician used it in the Parliament. Now he was, well, I should say that he mentioned it rather than used it. He was quoting something that a young boy was told, and he spoke the word in trying to express compassion for the boy and hurt on his behalf, but it came off a bit awkwardly, and it was unclear whether he had thought through the decision to speak the word, because he got a lot of stick for it and he had to apologize.
Mm-hmm. I think we have another question about the defining process.
Yes, we do. Jose, if you would like to unmute and ask your question.
Sure. Hello, everyone. This is a fascinating topic for me because I am a lexicographer myself. So I'm wondering if there is any category of words that you find particularly challenging or maybe kind of slippery, in the sense that maybe they are just ephemeral usages that may be very popular today but may go away tomorrow. So when they are documented once, it's hard to define what they really mean, or any kind of words that you go like, I wonder if it's worth creating a blog entry for this.
That's a good question. Go for it, Jane.
I was just going to say there are some compounds and similar confections that come and go. I'm trying to remember ones.
Maybe the shit-gibbon ones?
Thank you. That's the one. Did you write that one? I'm trying to remember.
No. I think Ben Zimmer looked at it.
Yes, that was Ben Zimmer, The Rise of the Shit-gibbon. That's...
Thank you, Stan. You actually have to make noise when,
things like
on Zoom. You have to make noise when you present something visually, or nobody actually. If you're on speaker,
I should shake it then. I should shake it because he has googly eyes.
Yeah, oh, very nice.
Taylor Jones wrote a very good. Are you browsing again, James?
Yeah, I was just looking over the Rise of the Shit-gibbon article. I'm sure that we have some others, but yes, the person called the obvious Donald Trump called who's it? Dalen Leach
There's a
called
whole
him
range of
fascist,
those,
loofah
like,
face, shit gibbon.
and yeah, it gave rise to a whole set of them, like wank puffin and
Yeah, twat weasel and
fuck trumpet.
yeah.
Now on the Because Language podcast that evolved from Talk the Talk, they spoke to linguists about what they loved about language, and I think Ben Zimmer spoke specifically about shit gibbon and the wave of linguistics research that it has given rise to. So that might be something that would be of interest to Jose if he's looking for these ephemeral words in
Yeah. And we already have the link in the chat window. If some of you aren't looking at the chat window, it's almost as interesting as this discussion, what people are putting in there.
I saw someone asking if it was hyphenated, and I don't think they generally are.
Not usually, no.
Yeah.
But that is something that we maybe should get around to for the blog, James, is a strong language style sheet, because we get quite a few hyphen questions.
Well, that could be a whole blog on whether to hyphenate or not.
Yeah, well, I can see a style book specifically for swear words. I mean, why the fuck not?
What about from a lexicographer's viewpoint? There are, I mean, I think very famously, a lot of swear words have multiple entries in sort of in the OED and dictionaries that will devote a lot of space. And you know, we had Jesse Scheidlauer on with the F word. This is the second edition. I was embarrassed myself that I didn't have the newest one, but this is, you know, entry page after page of just uses of that word. So do swear words present? Is that the third edition?
I have the same one as Stan has.
Yeah,
it's a classic.
Behind the Times.
Yeah.
So is it problematic to define sweary words?
A lot of it's usage based.
Jonathan Green is the man I would talk to first about that.
Green's
Dictionary of Slang.
Yes, thank you.
Which is now completely free for anyone to use in its entirety. It's an amazing resource.
Yeah, perfect. Let's move away from swearing, if that's possible. Because there's more to you both than just guys who swear, I assume. I could be wrong. James, I mentioned that you're prolific. You've got several books that don't count. I've got Songs of Love and Grammar, a poetry book. With titles like Ellipses That Shall Never Touch.
Yes.
Ellipsis, excuse me. So what are the other books you have?
Let's see. There's Confessions of a Word Lush, which is made up of fictional vignettes from my blog. So it's all actually available for free online, but if you want to have it in the friendly, nice, grabbable format, that's available. And also 12 Gifts for Writers, which is also available for free online, but anybody who wants to have it in printed form, and I'm going to be bringing lots of copies of those to the next conference I get to go to. If we ever have conferences again, and they're so inexpensive, I'll say just, buy me a drinking and get a copy. Although I can see that this could lead to disaster if it's a very popular book. And then I have 2 cookbooks, The Asshole's Guide to Cooking, Volume 1 and Volume 2. But those have all been self-published. I keep trying to put together book proposals that somebody wants to represent, and so far have not managed to. I really thought that I might have a way to go about, an approach to style and usage. And then Benjamin Dreyer came out with his book, and I thought, you know what? I really think that that's been done quite well. Let's go to something else completely. So I have ideas, and I keep
Yeah.
trying little trial balloons on my blog to see if anybody likes different approaches.
Do you write every day? I mean, you write a lot.
Well, I mean, writing my blog is a form of relaxation, but I decided to cut it back to every other day, more or less, because I realized that I was writing more than I would want to read, let alone anybody else.
Yeah. How about you, Stan? You write for Macmillan quite often, and you write on your own blog.
Yeah, the Macmillan column is a monthly now, and I tried to keep my own blog alive, but I just haven't found a great deal of time to post on it the last while, and ditto for Strong Language, but I do try to keep them up and not neglect them altogether.
Yeah. Macmillan is, I don't know if Macmillan is all that known here. I mean, I suppose it because it has a Twitter presence and regular blogs from you that increases its familiarity, but it's very much in the English style, language learner.
Yes. The dictionary online has a UK and a US form, so you can look up a word in either jurisdiction, but it's a learner's dictionary, and it's particularly popular among English language learners around the world and their teachers, I suppose. But, the blog is a good resource, and I'm given basically free license to write about anything language related that interests me.
Oh, so, that's nice, except perhaps sweary words.
Except, yes, I can do that a little. And yeah, I remember when they entered Bawbag into their open dictionary. They have an open dictionary which is crowdsourced. People just submit a word that they find isn't in the dictionary, and it's reviewed by the lexicographers there, and they add it or they don't. And when Bawbag was added, that's B-A-W-B-A-G, it's a Scottish insult. It made headlines around the UK. Basically, Bawbag is in the dictionary now. It was a big deal and a very amusing one.
Right.
So we're back to swearing. Sorry about that, Mark.
Oh yeah, well, it always seems to come back to swearing. Before the show started, you said you had some sweary books strategically placed, and suggested that I spend some time looking for them. And I do see in praise of profanity next to the Merriam-Webster Usage Dictionary. I haven't.
Michael Adams is a fine book.
I'm sorry?
Michael Adams is a fine book.
Ah. And what else do you have up there that is swear related that you can recommend to people looking for books on swearing? A hidden one up there.
I'll give you two. There's
Holy
Shit by Melissa Moore. A Brief History of Swearing. And another history is by Geoffrey Hughes, which is a social history. Those are both excellent.
Oh, okay. Not familiar with that one.
And one more.
Oh, that's Benjamin Bergen.
Benjamin Bergen's What the F? It's the Science of Profanity.
Uh-huh.
And that came out just a year or two ago, so there's lots of up-to-date research.
Right.
So
we usually start with coronavirus and pandemic and how that's affected people. You're both working freelance editors and writers. Let's start with you, Stan, in outside of Galway. How are things doing with social distancing and staying at home, and has it had an effect on you?
It hasn't had an effect, but I've been lucky in a lot of ways. I work from home, and my work took a hit, but it has come back again in recent weeks. I haven't been unduly affected. We were in lockdown in Ireland for a few months, so I didn't travel outside Salthill for that time, but the last month or so I've been able to visit family again.
Well, I mean, as soon as the lockdown hit, we had, my wife and I had a number of travel plans, and they all got canceled. Bam, just like that. So all of a sudden I had a whole bunch of extra time and immediately filled it up with more editing projects. Weirdly, None of my editing projects so far have been substantially delayed or put back or pushed back at all. I wonder if there's going to be a knock-on effect at some point, but so far, for me, the coronavirus has not been has not diminished my income. It's actually increased my available money, A, because I've been making more, and B, because I haven't been spending it on travel. And we'll see how that goes, though. And I mean, I'm right in the middle of Toronto, so we get, at first, go several days without even stepping outside. You'd have to go buy groceries. But now Toronto's sort of in cautious mode where you can go outside, walk down the sidewalk without wearing a mask. And we're Canadians, so you know we don't like getting in each other's face too much anyway. And then if you go inside a building, you have to put on the mask. And again, we're Canadians, and there are very few Canadians. In spite of what the media coverage would suggest, there are almost no Canadians who strongly object to wearing the masks. There are very few people who are being dicks about it, honestly. Apparently, it's a much bigger problem in some parts of the U.S.
Apparently, yes. And you're dual citizenship. Is that right? You're
yes,
an American?
That's true. I am a dual citizen, and I have 2 passports, and I have to file 2 tax returns, and all of that. I don't see myself getting to the U.S. in the next couple of months, however.
No. I think that's probably why. And you're probably not registered to vote in the U.S., so you can't.
Oh, well, I can, actually, I need to get around to that. To vote by mail. As an American citizen, I can vote, and I would feel bad if I didn't, I'm sure.
All right. All right, well, I think we're just about up to our time. If we don't have any other questions, this has been a terrific hour, lots of bleeps. Thankfully, we're not going to bleep any of them when we post it to YouTube. We'll just put a little warning up top. But
that's fucking great.
Yeah, Stan keeps showing these things that nobody can see because if you're on speaker view, you're looking at me, which is not nearly as interesting as looking at Stan with his books. You might want to just click on Stan's image and see what he's up to. But anyway, thank you all for being here. We'll be back not next week, but in 2 weeks for another interesting show. And Stan, great to see you and talk with you in person rather than just on Twitter.
Likewise, Mark, it was a real pleasure, and thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, thank you. And
thanks for
James,
inviting me too.
Yes.
Good to see you again, James, and to meet Erin and Heather as well, and to get the questions from our viewers.
We'll have to get back through Ireland at some point when it's permissible. I enjoyed the trip so much. We're sure to end up in Galway again. Galway, excuse me.
When was that trip? A couple of years ago?
It was 2 years, 2018, is that right? I think so.
I think so, late 2018.
I know it was October, that I remember.
So you got together in Galway or near Galway, and what was the topic of conversation? Do you remember?
Oh, we just shot the shit.
Okay. Always curious. You know, you always want to be a fly on the wall of 2 very interesting people talking about lexical matters, which is kind of what this show is, right? Everybody gets to watch us talk about lexicography and words and swears. So
I think we talked about dialect more than swearing.
Probably. Yeah. It seems very likely. I've long had a fascination with Irish English and with Irish. I actually learned some of it many years ago and have been gradually forgetting it ever since. But it sticks. It's a lovely language. Even my pronunciation is terrible.
All right. Thank you. Thank you very much, everybody, and we'll see you in 2 weeks.